Good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to Mumbai Angels Network Reboot to Industry Edition, a series of events focused on the challenges and opportunities for specific sectors in the new normal. Before we begin, I request all of you to please keep your devices on mute to ensure you hear the speakers clearly and can participate better. This session is divided into 40 minutes of panel discussion and 20 minutes of Q&A. Do send us your questions via chat. Our team will curate them and we'll try our best to get them answered by esteemed panelists. If you wish for your question to be answered by a specific panelist, please do let us know and we'll see what we can do about it. Our sector in focus for today is the electric vehicle segment. I would like to acknowledge our sponsors and partners for today's session. Taxation partner Tax Mantra Global, ecosystem partner Atal Incubation Center, Banastali Vidyapeeth, session partners Zuva and Wazirex, sustainability partner Sustainer. Our panelists for this discussion are Bharath Devanathan, Senior Vice President, Growth and Electric Vehicles at Bound. Bharat comes with nearly 20 years of experience and has bolstered leadership teams and looked into Bounce's business growth and expansion, strategy and operations, and on the electric vehicle initiative. He brings immense experience in the space of internet technology and e-commerce fields. His diverse and global experience makes him a multi-dimensional leader. Bharat's previous stint was as CEO of Groupon Inc., APAC with emerging markets region, and has worked with brands like Yahoo and Visa Company. Our next panelist for today, Chetan Maini, is the Vice Chairman, co-founder of Sun Mobility. Chetan holds a BSME from the University of Michigan and an MSME from Stanford University. He has over 20 years of experience in electric, hybrid, and solar vehicles and has applied for and been granted over 30 global patents. He founded Reva Electric Car Company, which is now Mahindra Reva, and is globally acknowledged as a pioneer in electric vehicles. He has played an instrumental role in implementing the EV policy in India and has been recognized with multiple awards by BBC, Economist, Fast Company, Business Week, among others. The next panelist, Dhivik Ashok, is the co-founder of Go Green EOT. He has been in the EV space for the last 10 years and has seen ups and downs of the industry. He was also the first company to pivot out of the B2C focus and focus completely on B2B. Divik has about 9 patents registered in the battery space. He was also part of at major conferences in Taiwan, China, India, US, and Europe. His was the first Indian company to showcase at the CES in 2019 and is also an active voice in the EV ecosystem and is also an active voice on LinkedIn. The session for today will be moderated by Abhilash Savidhan, who is an automobile professional and EV powertrain and integration expert. He is an automotive professional with over 20 years of experience, of which 14 years was with India's top passenger car OEM, and is a clean energy and a new mobility enthusiast. His areas of expertise are fuel systems and EV powertrain integration. I would like to thank our panelists for their time and for giving us and our audience this opportunity to learn from their insights. Without taking up more time, over to you, Abhilash.
Thank you, Shivani. I'm really excited to be here with some of the who is who of the Indian EV. Talk about India's EV story. India's EV story has a lot been like a Bollywood movie. Whenever the hero, the EV, tries to win over the heroine, the vehicle buyers, the villain, the IC engine enters the scene and prevents the hero from winning the heart of the heroine. But we all have seen Bollywood movies, and we know that in the end, the hero and heroine will be eventually be together. So, to start with, let us see what the path of auto electrification in India will be like. We have seen that because of the government initiatives, there has been a start of the electrification in the public transport space. And as far as two-wheelers and three-wheelers, they are already in total cost of ownership positive and has taken off and will continue to grow. I guess the taxis and passenger car segment will take some more time. I would like to start with Chetan Maini Saab. Sir, what are your thoughts on the path of auto electrification in India?
Thanks, Abhilash. Good morning, everyone. I think that if you look at India, unlike the West, 85% of our vehicles are two-wheeler. People move in two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and buses. And that's where 85% of energy is being used to. So unlike the West, where the focus is largely on cars, I think India's focus is going to be more on two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and buses to start off with. In this space more over time on the shared mobility side of it. And I think these sectors are going to grow the most as we think in the next 10 years. We've already seen cost parity in some forms of transportation, especially with new business models. So when you think of areas like battery swapping, where batteries can be separated from vehicles, you can start to see cost parity already on three-wheelers and in two-wheelers, and in certain buses with certain form factors, right? I think cars are going to take a little longer to come through. Yeah. So we're going to see these form factors moving very quickly. With battery costs declining at 8% year on year, we are seeing that conversion points happen faster. And on the other side, with April 1st introduction of BS6, which is now delayed by a couple of months because of COVID, you're seeing costs of vehicles go up anywhere from 5% to 15% as a result of BS6 implementation. So in general, you look at the next few years, the cost of IC engine technologies is going to go up, while the cost of electric mobility from a technology point of view is going to come down on this area. From an energy perspective, if you think of it, that renewable energy today is already at $3 per unit, which is less than $6 per barrel of equivalent, which means if someone set up an energy plant and you can buy energy from that crossover point on all of these areas. For the first time, I would say in 15 years, the technology is correct. You're seeing cost structures make sense. You're seeing shared mobility at a growth level. So I think, while the COVID will have some challenges in the next 6 to 9 months, and that's across the industry, the long-term growth potential on EVs is going to be very, very bullish about it. And I think we're poised for a great future, more on different forms of transportation in probably the West. So I think three-wheelers will be the first, then two-wheelers, and then buses, and then cars. That's the way I would look at how the growth would be in terms of electrification.
Dhivik, would you like to add your thoughts on this?
I agree to what Chetan said. Just the fact that, would it be two-wheelers or three-wheelers? I would definitely go with two-wheelers. The reason being, India is the biggest two-wheeler market in the world, right? And today, if you look at any of these high-speed vehicles which are there, they're at least on par or closer to the 100 to 110 cc range. That is about 60% of the two-wheelers or 60% of the scooters sold in India are lesser than the 110 cc. And that is where these high-speed vehicles, which run anywhere above 50 to about 75 kilometers an hour, is pegged at. And that itself is about 60% of the market. And today, if I would have to lay it out, I would probably say two-wheelers would be the first. And even with swapping and without swapping, the price parity is there.
Yes.
The price parity has come in so that, it's not going to really be like, are you paying extremely high? You'll probably be paying about 10,000 rupees more and 10 to 15,000 rupees more. And that is something which, even if you look at it from an EMI perspective, it's probably about 2 to 3,000 rupees more that you would end up spending over the complete, 2 to 3,000 rupees more is what you would end up paying per year itself. So even with COVID, what has happened is there has been a resurgence in the consumer buying of electric vehicles. So my take would be, probably shared mobility in the form factor of, let's say, a bike taxi would be a little far off. But something like what Bounce is doing or something like what Vogo is doing, those are the form factors which will take off. Along with which, there is this huge thing coming in from the consumers as well, because consumer today is looking at an electric vehicle where he's paying about 3,000 rupees as an EMI. Whereas for a gasoline, it would be around about 2,500 to 3,000 rupees as an EMI, with around about 2,000 to 3,000 rupees more as your fuel expenses itself. So, I mean, if you look at it from an EMI perspective, if you look at Indian buying, I mean, close around about 84% people buy two-wheelers on loans. And I mean, I have closely seen a resurgence in the consumer space itself. So I would peg it at I'd peg it at two-wheelers first, three-wheelers next, buses, followed by taxis. Probably four-wheelers would be another 3 to 4 years out. And if you look at it, shared mobility, at least from a bike owner perspective, what it was pre-COVID to what it is now, there's been a slight dip. But nevertheless, these are the two models where ownership of a two-wheeler and shared mobility will go hand in hand.
Thank you, Devik. Bharath, would you like to add your thoughts onto this?
Yeah, completely sort of aligned and sort of, I think, completely in sync with what Chetan and Dhivik have stated. And so I think, I won't sort of spend time on that. Completely agree. I think I wanted to provide two perspectives, one from the current situation, which is COVID, and the other one is from a shared mobility perspective when it comes to electric vehicles, right? So I think, so let me start with shared mobility. So like Devik mentioned, we are the total cost of ownership on operating an EV over its lifetime is definitely lower than a petrol vehicle, right? And everybody understands that. But it's very hard to sort of convince a consumer to make a higher upfront payment, even if they have this knowledge, right? And everyone always looks at what is my out-of-pocket expense now. I don't care about 2, 3 years, 5 years as much as now. So that's a bit of a hurdle to cross, right? And then there are 2, 3 ways to do this, right? One is like Mr. Maini mentioned, is to sort of remove the battery from the ownership and sort of take it away from the cost of the vehicle. So there are those models that are developing. So the other is how can shared mobility and how is shared mobility playing a role here, right? See, I think one is, all of us on this panel and even others in the ecosystem, we are sure that India is going to make a transition from petrol to electric vehicles. It was a question of if, but now it's just a question of when, right? So it's going to happen, but it's hard to predict what the timeline will be. But I think shared mobility has a huge chance to catalyze this change and really accelerate this change. So if it was going to take, let's say 10 years, 5 to 10 years, I think shared mobility can shave off easily 3 years in this process. How? Right? Because shared mobility is giving the experience of an EV to a consumer without the need for them to make any upfront payment. So it's a pay-as-you-go model, and you experience EV on shared mobility, right? And I think that's how it should and it will reach the masses in India first. Afterwards, whenever people want to decide to buy their own vehicle, whatever the reason may be, when they've experienced an electric vehicle and understood its benefits, I think it will be an easier sort of hurdle for them to cross whenever. Today, to experience an EV vehicle, you have to buy it. There are hardly any other options available. But shared mobility can sort of bridge that gap. And I see shared mobility playing a big role. Not only Bound, but everyone, like Dhivik said, everybody in this ecosystem will be a huge catalyst in this change, right? That's number one. Yeah. Two, in this COVID situation, and I'm just sort of drawing on a parallel to what happened in China with SARS in 2003, right? This also dovetails with what policies we sort of implement in India. But in China, in 2003, after SARS, right, it was a very contagious disease, so people didn't want to go on public transport, use public transport. So they wanted to buy their own vehicle. But the policies at that time were such that if you wanted to buy your own vehicle and if you wanted to use it in central business districts, right, in many cities in China, the only reasonable choice you had was to buy an electric vehicle. You could buy a gasoline vehicle, but it was restricted what you could do with it, right? So the year of SARS, right, is when EV saw close to a 20x jump in sales. And that was the inflection point. And after that, it just took off. Of course, there's a lot of policies also that help this. But I think a similar sentiment sort of exists here. And this is the reason why Dhivik is also saying that there's a resurgence in EV sales after COVID, is because now people who are on the borderline are not thinking about buying a vehicle, are thinking about buying a vehicle.
Yes.
And then, so the market has sort of increased. But what choice to make is still there. But I think EVs, and today there's a subsidy for a two-wheeler, depending on the battery configuration, you can get up to 20,000 bucks off. So it's making it more favorable. Even some of the two-wheeler OEMs we are in touch with are saying that they're seeing, sales pick up after so I think these two reasons, we're on this panel, and I think even the audience here would sort of be happy to see that EVs will take off.
Yeah, Divik had, Bharath had touched upon an interesting point. In fact, he spoke about one of the barriers of EV adoption, which happens to be cost. So when we talk about barriers of EV adoption, the most talked about points are price, range, infrastructure or ecosystem, and some say there are not many vehicles. And of course, this order of these barriers always differ, but the barriers most of the time remains the same. And Bharath also spoke about the lack of awareness or the perceived cost. So these are some of the barriers that I think is hindering the EV adoption in India. So Chetan sir, how do you think we'll be able to overcome these barriers and encourage EV adoption in the Indian market?
So we rightly talked about three important barriers. One is upfront cost. Two is range anxiety. And three is the long refueling time. Right? From an upfront cost point of view, models that will definitely alleviate it is to take the batteries out of the equation. That would bring the cost of the vehicle to be cost neutral. It does one more important thing. Today, what happens is the consumer's expectation in India is to have a vehicle that's similar performance. So if you take a two-wheeler, you want it to have the same performance as a regular, say, 100cc scooter, which means that then you need at least a 4 to 5 kilowatt powertrain. You can't do a 2 kilowatt powertrain, 1.5 kilowatt powertrain. Right? Now, to do that, it also consumes more energy, which means you have a challenge around that front. So people today compromise everything, use a smaller powertrain, a smaller battery, a smaller thing. And the net effect is that you neither are here or there. You're in a compromise solution. So removing the batteries allows you to up the powertrain, up the other performance parameters. So you can now get a scooter that's priced similar or cheaper than an IC engine vehicle. The second is range anxiety. And I think, my learnings of 20 years is range anxiety is very psychological. People do not make logical decisions when they buy vehicle. Buy it for 1% of the requirement and not 99% of the requirement. So a scooter, normally people do not more than 40 kilometers a day. Once a month, the guy does 100 because he's got to drop his kid to school. He's then got an extra sales call, and he remembers the 100-kilometer day, which then he says that, listen, if I did 100, I should at least get 120. And then he says, well, if the OEM tells me 120, I got to discount it because it never meets that. They never meet the requirements. So I want 140. But now what he says, if you want me to really buy electric, I want 140. Right? And because that's 1% of my usage time, but I need it because that happens to me once in a while, right? And now his decisions on that. Now you can give him 140 kilometers, but that will make the battery cost maybe 60 to 70% price on this area. So areas like swapping allow you then to just do an extra swap in 2 minutes. And therefore it takes care of those concerns which are 1%, which are preventing someone from buying it. So range anxiety is very important on this area. And the third is long refueling time, right? Especially if I think of shared mobility and everyone. You look at an auto rickshaw driver or who's on Uber platform, Ola platform. You look at a guy who wants to take a scooter. You're not going to wait for hours to charge, right? So asset utilization is very critically shared, and so is refueling time. And so it allows us to reduce refueling time all the way to an hour. The fourth part that comes across, which is very concerning, is warranty. So people are concerned, what if I buy a vehicle and the battery's failing? And typically the problem, especially as you get northern India where you at 45 degrees, and in small forms of transportation, batteries at 45 degrees don't do well. Charge and they go to 50. And so you get a life cycle that's significantly lower, maybe half of it. That doesn't make business sense. So now a consumer who's buying it, who says, well, I thought my batteries would last me 5 years, end up lasting 2 years. And then he's got to shell out 50% of the cost on this area, becomes a challenge, right? So I think unless we fundamentally address this with newer business models and technologies, where we're giving consumers a product that's similar to an internal combustion engine at a price point that is similar, cost of operation that's cheaper, and refueling that's faster, quicker, and more digital, that's when I see consumer adoption happening. So I think that battery swapping models like what we're doing and others are working towards become very integral as a part of especially smaller form factors of two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and buses in terms of helping adoption on this area.
Okay, Bharath, what are your views on other pain points like charging time, and there are issues of faulty charging station, and I think and there is this question of responsibility of charging station. Now, right now we have oil marketing companies; they are responsible for setting up filling stations. But when it comes to charging station, I think there is still no clear, clearly chalked out plan or clearly chalked out traffic as to who should be responsible, how it should be run, and how do you think, Bharat, these problems can be addressed?
So if you look at the use cases that we are talking about so far in this seminar, right? We are saying it's going to be mostly two-wheelers than three-wheelers, and so for these vehicles, like swapping solutions exist and charging solutions exist. Now, let's take the case of a two-wheeler. If it's like shared mobility, for example, and in shared mobility, we cannot afford the downtime of charging, right? Charging is at least 2.5 to 3 hours today. And irrespective of whatever someone says, there's development in fast charging, I don't see any of that being commercialized for the next couple of years at least, right? So we cannot, for example, afford downtime of 2 hours. But a consumer, can afford downtime of 2 hours either in the afternoon in his office or at night at home, right? So those solutions exist. Now, and the same thing, if you take, for example, B2B players like, or delivery players like Swiggy, Dunzo, Flipkart, eCart, all these guys, delivery, they have high utilization of their vehicles. So they cannot afford downtime, right? So they need either a fast charging solution or they need a swapping solution. And these solutions exist. I think once you start sort of going, 1 or 2 levels deeper as to what the actual problem is and what needs to be solved, I think it's a pretty easily solvable problem. Like, for example, let's say I am I have a fleet of, let's say I'm, DHL, right, in India, and I have, let's say, 20,000 vehicles in a particular city, right? If I convert all of them to electric, it is in my interest to set up the infrastructure for it, not wait for someone else to do it. Even if I set it up, and I'm not talking about charging infrastructure, maybe but charging is expensive, but even swapping infrastructure, if I set it up myself, right, I will, and if I set up swapping stations along the routes that I know the frequency of these routes and so on, and they're all predictable, then even if I make that investment myself, it will be, at least I would say 2x cheaper than doing it on a petrol vehicle, right? Mm-hmm. So I think relying on someone else to do charging or all the time, or of course if they exist and they're economical, you should use them, but expecting a public-private partnership or a government entity to do something for you, I think we are far away from that. I think people in this ecosystem need to make that happen together.
Yeah, just to add to what you just said, I completely agree. I mean, today we've put swapping infrastructure in 9 cities, And we worked exactly what Bharath said. We've talked to players who use it for fleet and see what their requirements are and set first infrastructure points. And then with partners like Uber, we've tried to understand how they are, where their drivers you go. And then accordingly, we've set the infrastructure up. And because all the vehicles and batteries are connected, as you put this infrastructure up, you're seeing how they're using it. So in cities like Chandigarh, we started with a couple of swapping stations. We added more every week on this area, as you said, the population going. And it takes a day to set up the infrastructure for, right? Once it's ready and it's put in place. So take a city of Bangalore today. Bangalore has 83 LPG petrol bunks, LPG stations. 83 LPG stations cater to 200,000 autos in Bangalore. And it took 12 years for the cities to set up this infrastructure, right? Probably we can put up 100 swapping stations city in maybe 4 months or 5 months. You can very quickly put up an infra equivalent, maybe not the same throughput, but to what's there already that a city needs. Adoption can be very fast by actually putting this together once you have shared mobility providers and others coming together. So each one will do their own job, but there has to be a cohesiveness of OEMs, shared mobility providers, and infrastructure players coming together to put it together and make this happen.
Dhivik, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, what I personally think are the barriers for adoption very clearly. One, like what Chetan mentioned, is cost. Second, as what everyone thinks of, is range anxiety. The third barrier that I strongly think is technology. The challenge is today, little do we know that there are close to around about 400 to 500 batteries which got burnt the last summers. And every single time the summer kicks in, then it becomes extremely hard to maintain these batteries. So this, before it becomes a cancerous thing in the EV industry, I think this needs to be nipped in the bud. Where today companies, majority of the companies, what they're doing is they're probably importing battery packs without having done any of work on thermals or anything like that, which is adding to company. I know of a company which is quite popular in the Indian EV ecosystem itself, where the vehicles which are burning, right? And dealers are unhappy, customers are unhappy, and this is leaving a very sour taste. And like I said, if I look back at my 10 years journey in this space, the first death of electric vehicles happened because of lead acid batteries. The second is probably going to happen because of startups which are not looking at technology as something to build a product on. Now that said, even with regards to a swapping station, what I closely think is for a B2B application like what Bharath's company is running, or like what Uber, the likes of Ola, like the likes of Delivery and players like that, I have a very strong case to believe that this makes a lot of sense. But what we've done is when we've surveyed a lot of customers, we've seen a lot of customers wanting to charge at home. Now the difference here becomes, I don't know, probably Chetan could add a lot more insights onto this. When we look at making a battery pack, we definitely look at making a battery pack which has control over the charge rates, which has control over its thermal buildups and things like that. Whereby we do not make it for convenience of, detach and attach. Thereby, safety is one side that we take. At least a fixed battery has a great piece to look at. But Chetan, if you could just add in about, how this whole technology / thermal / battery piece works on swappable. I think.
Sure. I think you put a very important point.
Yes.
I almost take that as hygiene because we've been doing it for 20 years. But sometimes I guess we've got to take a step back to look at it. So I think you need to start with cells that are much more stable. So for example, the cells we use the cell level, it's not only 86 cells to one. Two, we make sure that each cell has individual thermal management all the way to the outside. Again, this is not being done, which makes that hotspots get generated, which is very critical. You you got to have individual cell thermal management. So our design enables us to have individual cell thermal management. Three, of course, you've then got to have the right thermal gels that make sure the conductivity is good on this front. Fourth, sufficient number of sensors to enable you to ensure that's being run here with active control of discharge and charge, so you can protect the system under all conditions. Right? Five, you've got to make sure that the connectivity to the vehicle is real time. So therefore, if the battery is not performing if the battery is at a higher temperature or lower SOC, then it communicates to the vehicle what's the maximum limits it can take, and the vehicle adheres to it. So you just can't put something without the two talking to each other. Therefore, you always make sure the sync up is there, right? And the sixth most important part for us is that how do you think of cooling the batteries? Because whatever you do, if a battery in a fixed battery is parked on a scooter all day in Delhi, it's an ambient at 45, it will hit 45. Then you try to charge it, it'll go to 48, 49. Then you try to drive it after that, it'll go to 53, 55, right? That starts to become unsafe. In the swapping, what we do is we reduce the temperatures back to sub 30 degrees, 25 degrees or so. So what happens is you keep the batteries much cooler on this area, and it enables it to be significantly reduce the safety levels. So it's a combination of cell integration, right electronics, cooling, all have to come together if you're going to make a safe package. And in our case, we assemble our batteries in-house, except for the cell. Everything is designed and built in India and tested here. You can put the batteries underwater, you can drop them from 1.2 meters. So you have to design for India to make it very successful. And I think that's absolutely critical. If you don't do that, then you're going to have a lot of issues. And there are gaps in technology today. And I agree with Rick that the most focused area has to be get the technology right first.
Next, let's talk about something important. What is it the investors are expecting from the sector? The investors probably feel, or maybe it's true, that they have to wait for a longer time frame before asking for returns. This is because this is a long-term gain. And I personally think that the investor enthusiasm will increase as we converge towards price parity. And a lot can be done with people with different skill sets and different technologies come together and collaborate. Or for established OEMs, I think if they start focusing on electric vehicle business, like Tata Motors for example, has set up a separate business unit for electric vehicles. So there are a lot of opportunities that exist in the utility and service arena also, like digital technologies like charging location finders, reservation applications, online payments, ride sharing services, the entire ecosystem. So Bharath, what do you think are the investors' expectations from this sector?
I think the investors' expectations are more or less similar when it comes to any, at least my view, right? They have a particular sort of interest in investing because they were looking at certain returns, and that's the sort of business they're in. Some of them look for short term, some of them look for medium term, which is about 7 to 10 years, and some of them look for even long, right? I think like every, if you talk to VCs, or every investor is keenly looking at this space. Every investor has talked to every startup, and every startup has talked to every investor, and it's there. But I think what is one, like a hurdle that's sort of coming in the way of investment, obviously, is two things, right? One is uncertainty about when and how this market will sort of shape up. Everybody agrees it will, but not the pace and how, right? So that's one. And two, also on the capabilities of the particular startup. I think one thing that I've sort of seen to an extent, but heard a lot from investors is, there's a lot of sort of innovation in startups in this field, both in vehicles and in other sort of elements of the ecosystem. But I think this is a sector where the transition from a prototype to large scale manufacturing is very, very high. It's not like a software startup, or it's not like an operation startup that you do. So this gap is quite high. So one of the I think questions in the mind of the investor is always how can this scale? Like for example, we've some things I've heard and I've seen also is that investors say, okay, this is a great company, great founders, but I don't see a single manufacturing bone in this setup, right? So how is this going to scale? So those are some of the sort of questions that are in their minds. I have not looked at the sector as a with the lens of an investor, but from my interactions and conversations with them, this is what I can gather. But at the end of the day, it's always, this is the amount of money I can put in, and this is what I think I can expect out of it. And with every investment they make, they expect, or they at least make the investment with the intent of getting a disproportionate return back.
Abhilash, just to add to that, I mean, if you look at it, with this whole electric mobility, or with this whole change in mobility itself, it is not that it is automobile which is the only thing which is changing. I think when I look at it, back and then in the Europe, I mean, there were funds the same way that is there in India today. You turn around and look at Europe today, you have, I mean, I can at least name like close to about 6 to 7 investors who are looking at energy as a sector alone. And in India today, there is zero. There are venture funds which are looking at mobility or electric mobility, ADAS, all of these as in silos. They're not looking at it as, okay, I've invested in an e-commerce, I'll also invest in an electric vehicle, into an electric vehicle company. I mean, they're looking at it in complete silos. I mean, like, you can look at Autotech Ventures. There is Maniv, which is an Israeli-based fund, which is extensively looking at mobility per se, electric mobility. I mean, what is the layers that you have in electric mobility? And like I said, I mean, even in Europe, you have a whole lot of funds which is only looking at energy as a sector. And, like we always do in India, I mean, we end up following someone, and I'm sure that, this is a trend that would even catch on in India as well. Right now, I mean, it's the same investor would want to invest in let's say a .com versus an EV versus a battery versus, ADAS and things like that. But I very strongly see that there is going to be an impetus for being extremely sector focused investors as well, coming in sooner than later into the Indian context.
To me, I think there are 4 key areas, and the investors in those areas may be very different. So one is a core technology. Someone's developing new batteries, battery management systems, new motors, controllers, chargers, connected solutions, and these are all the techs that are going to be needed, right? The second is the tier ones that are going to start to put this together. They may be part of tech, they may be separate from tech. They're actually delivering the solutions that you would need across all the components, and they're more manufacturing oriented, and they may have a tech part or not, or they may license that, right? Third is going to be the OEM sectors, which are going to not just have the traditional OEMs, but because in many ways, two-wheelers over time will become like cell phones. If you go back in 2005, you had companies that vertically integrated did everything. And so you had 2-3 key players. Today, a company, coming from scratch, buys a screen from A, hardware from B, gets an OS here, puts it together, and 6 months later they have a product, and a year and a half later they're selling millions of units, right? So the distributed manufacturing will come in a lot more, which means there will be disruption in how vehicles will be produced on this area. So that's the third sector on that. The fourth is going to be the infrastructure part of it, right? There's going to be fast charging, normal charging, swapping stations, integration with renewable energy and on this area, and investment on that. And the fifth is going to be the solutions that come across here, right? So Bounce is one, you have companies like Smarty, you have people who are doing different solutions around mobility as a service that would come in here, right? Now, if you think of the investors, they're a little different, right? A tech investor wanting to think of a new battery is very different from an infra investor who will look at different returns, because that's a different structure. So I think that to Dhivik's point too, it's much more complex, and it's not one investor trying to do everything. But I think there are some investors who are trying to say electric mobility and the electric, shared, connected, autonomous, and renewable energy is the big piece, and let's put a thesis around this and invest in across the ecosystem. And I think what we need is more of those kind of investors coming forth, because when you start connecting the dots of these pieces, you start to see a much larger picture. That still is not as existent, but you're seeing that slowly coming. You're seeing a few global companies looking at it, but I'm hoping India in the next 12 to 24 months, there will be more companies that have a thesis around this, and that would definitely enable a much larger spread and investment.
Okay, let's now talk about commercialization of fleets. I think Bharath is already into fleet management, but when it comes to all electric fleets, what are the challenges, opportunities, and solutions in the commercialization of fleets? Like, we have some all electric fleets, like we have got, I think, lithium urban technologies, we have got blue smart, I think Ola Electric is also doing something in this end. So what do you think are the challenges and opportunities and solutions in the commercialization of fleets? Bharath, would you like to start?
Yeah, so 1 second. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah, sorry, 1 second. Yeah, I think so. We at Bounce today, we run a fleet of about 1,000 electric vehicles, and it was initially we had to go through some hurdles to set it up with our swapping infrastructure, understanding EV vehicles, also customer perception of these vehicles. A funny anecdote, it's not one instance, but a lot of customers, switch on the vehicle and they expect it to make noise. And when it doesn't make noise, they think it doesn't work. And so they say, oh, I'm canceling this booking and I want to take another car. So there are these small hurdles, but, overall, I don't see, if you have the right technology and sort of plan it out well, I don't think it's too much of a hurdle. What we have seen is that it's much easier to operate an electric fleet as compared to a petrol fleet. And it's also cheaper to operate an electric fleet when you compare it to an electric fleet compared to a petrol. I think some of the challenges, I would say, there's not as many, let's say, EV technicians as there are, petrol bike technicians. But it's a solvable problem, and I think that's just a matter of time. So building the skill ecosystem around electric vehicles, is happening slowly. There are some government initiatives to do this as well, but even outside of that, it's happening, and it's not rocket science. So it's easy. It's a skill that's not very difficult to acquire if taught properly. Then the whole thing is about can you do demand prediction, range prediction, all of that very well. Can you maintain your batteries? Can you optimize your fleet so that you can increase the life of your batteries and so on? Right. So those are all sort of some things that come at running a fleet at scale.
Chetan sir, would you like to add to that?
I think Bharat's points were very, very well done. I mean, very well talked about. And I think that in our experience of doing it, the EV technician side is something that will get solved quickly. I also believe that electrics have a larger opportunity of doing things remotely. And in the past, we've been able to almost solve 80% of problems remotely on this area, on this front. I also feel that 90% of the problems that when a vehicle doesn't move in the morning is to do the charger or the batteries. So when you have solutions like swapping, which take the two out of the equation, you start to have much better uptime on this area. And I think finally for a consumer, who wants to use an electric, they would like to, in my opinion, have the performance that's the same as the ICE. So if they went and took it, they should not. In fact, I would make it, especially in shared mobility in these areas, slightly better when it's used for personal transportation. it then gives them a way that they want to choose that over something else because they find that better on this front, right? And I think that would be a big part of it. And using appropriate business models like this, and you can get a lot more connectivity than you can in regular IC engine vehicles. You can have a lot better customer engagement on this front, right? See, for example, you're not exactly sure perfectly how much fuel you have, even if you have fuel sensors, because they're not as accurate. But in electric, you know exactly to 0.1% how much energy you have, especially if you have sophisticated battery management systems and things. So the fact is that you can manage fleets much better. You can give much more predictability to a customer who walks up to a vehicle and says, I know exactly I can do 75 kilometers. You know their driving habits in the past so that you know how they use. So you can bring in a lot more analytics into this area, which can give a much better consumer experience on this front. The key probably for me is I think the cities have to get a little bit more involved. I think that there needs to be areas where there are infrastructure points which could be integrated along with areas of shared mobility, allow this spaces so that there's higher use of this area. You're already seeing the pieces of it in the beginning, like in some of the metro stations and stuff, but it has to be done at a much larger scale across the city. And that's where I think the local government has a play on this. And I think that the government, some of the initiatives could be helpful. Energy becomes a large part of the play, and energy gets taxed at 18% on GST if you especially look at these fronts, and vehicles at 5%. So the government should look at putting certain policy frameworks that enable a much more beneficial area to further help reduce certain costs on that front here. And my last thing is I think there is an opportunity, when you think of shared mobility and fleets, even fleet owners should think of them as sharing with each other. So if a battery is being used with fleet A and with fleet B and with fleet C, for example, you lower costs, right? And without impacting a person's brand value. So that when you start to think of shared mobility across pieces like this, then you can get further cost reductions. It's also important that shared mobility fleets come together in a way where they can still benefit even more to the end customer. And I'm not seeing that fully today. Each one is trying in his own place, but there's a high value of going shared one step further.
I'll completely agree to that, and I would request. Thank you for all the panelists actually for moving through the discussion and sharing really few really important insights related to electric vehicle. Understanding the time constraint, we will move directly to the questions that we are receiving from the live audience, and I'll be asking first question that we have received for Dhivik, that is there any way to address overnight charging of two-wheelers where parking is an issue? There are many localities which are two-wheeler heavy and do not have allotted parking. What do you think can be a sustainable solution for overnight charging for consumers who have such constraints?
See, for people who have that kind of a constraint, the ready fix solution is swappable batteries. You'll have to speak to Chetan for that. The second option is you don't have to own a vehicle. You can speak to Bharath for that. The third easier way of doing it is, see, this is a problem which is there, right? Like all that you need is the 5 amp socket. And I know of a company which is working around the same space, which is looking at even going out and democratizing this whole charging station piece. They kind of want to do that, like how you had the yellow coin box for phones back in the days, which you had at every corner. They kind of want to do something similar with charging and charging station and things like that. So even if that happens, then, whichever floor you live in, it's going to be there on the ground floor, and, it's not going to be expensive and things like that. And that's something which is going to work. So right now, there's an opportunity. So anyone who wants to think it through can, find that opportunity and can go all out.
Great, thanks, Dhivik. And I would pass it to Bharath if he wants to add anything to the same.
I think Dhivik covered it. I think the big solution to that is swapping. You can always carry a battery with you. It weighs about 10 to 12, sometimes 13 kgs. Carry it home and charge it there and take it back the next day. Yeah.
So Okay, great. Thanks, Bharat. Moving to the next question, I will pass it to Mr. Maini, that how we can share at least safety know-how in EV ecosystem for all, especially established firms.
The nice thing is 10 years ago when I was working on, actually 15 years ago when we put our first lithium-ion vehicles out, there was no norms, right? You had to figure everything yourself, do it in your own lab, and do it. Today, I think with the internet and the information available, you have hundreds of white papers around safety on this front. One. Two, you have a lot of regulatory framework, right? So India has IS 048 on this area. We have a new revision coming. You have a UN standard for shipping, you have other standards in Europe and for different systems. So today I would say that there are a lot of standards already available which cover 90% of probably cell and pack level areas. But then the parts that are more difficult is how do you think of redundancy in software? How do you think of things going wrong and corner cases? And that's probably a lot more white paper, a lot more experience. The last 5 to 10%, which actually is the most important part because it's harder to get. And some people also see it as being proprietary on this front. But there is enough today if you start to go through processes and regulation requirements that you can get 95% there. And I think 10 years ago, you would get 5% there. So I think this is very good if you just follow that. It's a very good starting point. And once you get there, I think with experience, you'll get the last 5%.
Thank you, Mr. Maini. I will move to Mr. Abhilash for the question that we have. It says, are the existing EVs ready for commercial use?
The existing passenger car EVs, if you talk about passenger car EVs, yes. Some of the later entrants into the EV space, like if you talk about Tata Motors, the Tata Nexon, it has got a range of about, I think, 300 plus kilometers, and it is equipped for fast charging at 50 kilowatts, and it has been extensively tested. So if you ask me, are the vehicles ready for commercial use? Yes. Even if you consider the commercial segment, like we have already seen buses being run by the state transport units across the countries. And the commercial usage, yes, it's just about the cost. And I think most of the vehicle manufacturers are working on cost and localization and indigenization. In fact, there's a lot of focus happening in localization and indigenization. And in a few years, I guess the costs are still going to come down with a lot of manufacturing, designing, and development happening in India. So to answer your question, yes, we are ready for commercialization. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Savidhan. Adding to the same question, I would like to ask Dhivik that how much role a higher battery charging time has in restricting the consumer acceptance, and I would like other panelists to share their views as well.
See, what generally happens is it's not about fast charging or a slow charging parameter per se. Now, when you look at lead acid batteries, they were charging, it took close to about 8 to 10 hours. Today, the safest way to charge a lithium battery is probably 4 hours if you don't have any cooling system built in. If you have a liquid cooled system which is built in, or an active cool, sorry. So if you have an active cool system built in, you can look at an hour and a half to have it charged as well. But that said, the restriction today is with regards to technology where, once you fast charge it, once the current goes in and it is not dissipated out, the heat buildup is not dissipated out, that's something which would lead to the battery blowing up itself. Thereby, today it's more of a technological advancement problem rather than, a commercialization problem.
So, Bharat or Mr. Maini, would you like to add your thoughts on the same?
Yeah, I think that first of all solutions will coexist. Slow charging, fast charging, ultra fast charging, and something. If you had your plug point at home and you did 40 kilometers a day in a two-wheeler, slow charging would be great. If it's a school bus that went in and sit there for 8 hours, you have 8 hours to charge. There's no need to do it in 1 hour, right? So I think that would be an area in terms of shared mobility swapping would be very important, or ultra fast charging, where uptime is very important on this area. So I think the first thing is not one is going to be all. It depends on the product, the customer, and the segment that you're looking at, and what would be the right solution on this front here. Right? However, from a technology point of view, there are technologies today that can charge in 15 minutes also, right? The fact is you can't get everything. You can't get the weight, you can't get the cost, you can't get charge time and everything, and the holy grail of all of it in one. So if you use a certain technology, you can reduce charging time to 15 minutes, but the battery is 2 times heavier than a regular lithium-ion battery because you use a Titanate technology, right? Similarly, if you try to get high energy out of something on this front, then you're probably likely to get lower cycle life and higher cost. So you have all of the parameters available, not everything available in the same area, right? But charging today, generally, as you fast charge a battery, you reduce its life unless you have very advanced thermal management. And that's why people typically take 4 to 5 hours to charge it on this area. And most technologies today have that challenge on this front, while there are a few exceptions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Maini. Bharath, would you like to add to that?
I think they've covered everything.
Well, so moving to the next, I would request all the panelists and the moderator to start with to share their closing comments, understanding the time constraints. So I would request Mr. Savidhan to start with the closing comment, and then we can move to other panelists.
I think we had a really interesting discussions. We spoke about the path of how India would be moving into electrification and what are the barriers on for the movement into electrification. We also spoke about what are the solutions to these barriers. Like for example, we talked about battery swapping. We talked about how 2 and 3 wheelers are going to lead this journey towards electrification. We also spoke about what the investors should expect when they are investing, and what are the areas available for investing, what are the business opportunities that are available. We also saw how easier, Mr. Maini spoke about how easier it's to manage an electric fleet compared to a regular fleet, how we can monitor the technical aspects remotely. And we also spoke about the charging infrastructure. And I think there was also Mr. Bharath spoke about the need of talent and how we can develop the talent. So I think we had a really interesting discussion, and I guess those in the audience got an idea of how India is moving towards electrification, along with the challenges and the solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Savidhan. Moving to Mr. Maini.
Yeah, I'm not going to summarize it, but I understand there are a lot of startups, so I maybe share some thoughts around what would be applicable for the younger community here in the startups. EVs today are getting more so-called sexy, and everyone wants to be in this area. I think it's important to see what piece of the puzzle you want to play in. People are trying to play in every area, and I think it's quite complex to do that, right? From my perspective, coming from technology to vehicle manufacturing and to infra, I think it's hard for people to do all of it and do all of it well. You've got to focus to which piece of the puzzle you want to be in. And in the beginning, it's very exciting to be in everything. Sometimes that it's important because it gives you an understanding of the ecosystem, and I think that's important for that to happen as an overall knowledge building. But then very quickly, you've got to focus on what piece are you going to differentiate yourself on. Is it a piece of BMS? Is it a battery? Is it a way you put connectivity together? Is it a way you put a piece of infra together? Is it how you think of a new mobility solution from a fleet point of view that can give a customer value person? Whatever it is has to be far more focused on this area as you look at it. The other part to me is you have to think of this being at a global level. Is your solution something from a tech point of view that can stand something globally? So if someone is doing something far better than you somewhere else, that person, the person who's doing it globally will come here. So you've got to not measure yourself with people around you here, but measure your technology, your thought process with it globally, but adapt it for Indian and local conditions as you look at it here. So that's very important, that you have to have this perspective of global and local as you think of your business opportunity and you look at it. The next few months are going to be very difficult. So getting, focusing more, getting one customer or two customers initially, making sure that you can prove out with them and being ready, using the next 6 months to spend more get the tech ready for you, so that when the things in markets opened up, you're ready to grow quickly. It's going to be important, and conserve cash while you're doing this, and high level of focus. So those are some thoughts for the team. I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Maini. Moving to Dhivik. Dhivik, your closing comments. Dhivik, you're on mute.
Sorry.
No problem.
I mean, I'd like to build upon what Chetan left off at. Like, right now, time to market is crucial. And what I would suggest is, to majority of the startups here, look at one area which you want to take up. And also remember, it's not that everyone out there know it all, because this industry by and large is relatively new. Look at it from a positive side that, there is scope if you just focus on one thing and you do that one thing right. And there's one thing which we've always followed upon, which is called co-option. If you can even read that book, there's a book called Co-option. I just thought I'll pull it off. It's there's a book by Barry J. Neil Buff, and that's the book. If you guys can get your hands on that, that is exactly the way electric vehicle industry is going to work. It is going to be people who will combine to make a solution right. And it's not like one person takes it all. And I mean, because of that, just make sure that you get whatever that one piece of the puzzle that you want to do extremely right. I mean, that's my 2 cents.
Great. Thanks, Dhivik. Moving to Bharath for his final comments.
Yeah, I think very well summarized by Mr. Maini and Dhivik. I think the point about is your solution the best globally is a very, very good one, and completely sort of agree that a solution that works elsewhere can also work here, and vice versa. So I think that's a very good point. I would also sort of in my conversations with startups, there's also this question of, what about the standards? Will there be a standard? What if we do something now and things change? I think ultimately, like if you see the standards that are developed, most of the time, the standards that are developed outside India and even in India for a variety of different use cases, the standards are most likely a result of what works for the market, right? In terms of usability, convenience, price, all of that, right? So, if you think you have a great idea and you're able to innovate in a focused area, like Mr. Maini said, what you come up with can become the standard. Like today, CCS and CHAdeMO are kind of standards, but they did that over a period of time. To a large extent, it was also co-opetition, like Dhivik is saying, like multiple manufacturers came together to build a charging standard. So that's also something I would sort of encourage you to think. I think we are far away today in India from standards being sort of rigidly implemented and being universally applicable. So if you're working on the next big thing and you think it's great, it can become the next standard. So don't let standards get in the way of this.
Great. Thanks, Bharath. Thank you for sharing your final comments, and thank you all other panelists also. So we have gone to the last segment, where on behalf of MA Network, I would like to thank Bharath, Mr. Maini, Dhivik, and Mr. Savidhan once again for your time. I would like to thank the audience for being active involvement, our members for their constant support, and the team at the back for curating this session. I would like to thank our sponsors and partners for today's session, our taxation partner, TaxMantra Global, our sustainability partner, The Sustainer, our ecosystem partner, Atal Incubation Center, Vanasthali Vidyapeeth, our session partners, Zoava Automotives and WazirX. Thank you everyone for joining us. Follow us on our social media pages to know more about the upcoming events in June. I would like to thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Akshay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.